Daniel Adams, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sam.
So, when we first came in touch, I soon learned that part of your story includes working in a hospice setting. And as I explore this conversation around understanding different generations, I'm really interested to hear more about your story and how with the things you learned and how that has affected you. So please help us understand what's your story.
Well, it's long and winding and kind of random, which, is great for podcasts, I suppose.
Yeah, those are the best.
I've always had a passion for music and a passion for people. And luckily, music doesn't really exist without people to engage with it. So I was going through school in music education because I thought I wanted to be a band director forever. And
Gosh, me
then the
too.
more,
I did a
the
year of
more,
band ed.
oh, for real?
I did. Then I went on my mission, but yeah, decided there's better ways for me to serve.
Yeah, it was like the more I got into it, it was like if I had to teach little Susie how to play the clarinet every day, it was like that was not going to happen. But I
Yeah.
love drums and I love rhythm. And most of all, I loved a large group of people coming together for a cause that was bigger than themselves.
Mm,
And then I
absolutely.
started noticing the power of music to motivate. And then I was always interested in psychology and what makes people tick.
Mm,
And so when I came back from Brazil, I was interested in, yeah, where do music and psychology overlap? And started seeing all this stuff about music therapy. So
mm.
went and had myself an experience at Utah State University, go Aggies, and went through the process to credential as a music therapist. And I was watching a presentation there, and there was a gal that came from hospice, and she brought the chaplain that she works with and her, and they did this whole presentation called Stairway to Heaven. And so it was like, on so many levels, it was speaking my language. And I just
Yeah,
had this
exactly.
lightning bolt that was like an audible voice that was like, hospice is where you need to be. I remember the seat I was sitting in, it was 2011. It was like this. It was so clear. And I was like, all right, I guess it's hospice. So I went to Hudson Valley, New York,
Okay.
Poughkeepsie. It's about 90 miles north of Manhattan. It's real
Mm.
close to Hurley, where Woodstock happened. It's one of the only Republican counties in New York, and I
Ah,
didn't know they existed, but they
I
do.
believe that's where the Culinary Institute of America is as well.
Yes, also there. And so it was just like it was eye opening to be in a space that had such a fun mix of people,
Yeah.
because it was like a whole bunch of folks that were like still doing the Woodstock thing, a whole bunch of conservatives planted in New York, and a whole bunch of people like still trying to work for IBM, and it was just like this mix. When I worked, so I was interning as a music therapist at Hudson Valley Hospice, and they had something like 150 patients on their census, and they had four different music therapists that would serve all these different families. And it was deeply meaningful work. And it was also incredible to me, the variety of experiences, because some of these folks were in assisted living facilities that were gorgeous and that were elaborate and ornate and like 15 grand a month to live there. And they never had visitors, and they were essentially a vegetable in bed. And so to be able to serve them as a music therapist was deeply meaningful, because they had this wealth of experience over a lifetime and nobody to share it with till I got there. And we start mining their memories through the lens of music. I found that to be deeply meaningful. And that was part of the experience. At the same time, there were also families who hadn't spoken for 20 years that got to get together and try and hash out whatever it needed to hash out. Sometimes that was an ugly process or a volatile process, a very angry process. Sometimes there's a lot of sadness and withdrawal in that process. And it was interesting, the intersection between music and spirituality that would come up continually. and a really unique experience. We also served a young lady in her early 30s with melanoma, and she ended up dying from that. And it's one thing when somebody has lived a full life, and we, as a culture, we kind of expect like, okay, well, you're 80, so it makes sense. And yeah, it's sad, but it's fine. It's kind of a different thing when somebody in their 30s goes, and it's like, whoa, that was way too soon. And so a lot of the response was really interesting, looking at age, looking at demographics. It was curious, like I said, to explore. Some families took it really, really hard. Some of them were like, had a strong belief in the afterlife. And so it was sad, but not debilitating. And it was just like this wide spectrum of folks serving in Dutchess County, New York. Some folks were on Medicaid. Some folks were in these elaborate, 15 grand a month to rent at this assisted living facility and just super lonely. And some people had family around them every day. And so it was this wide range of experience. And that's where the hospice journey started. And I was hooked.
So tell me more about what music therapy is and what's the function there and how did you help, just to give a bit more context.
Sure. I believe that human beings are musical souls. I love getting to know somebody sonically. Music is present. Every mom, infants can sing before they can talk. How's that? And that it's at the very foundation of it's what sets us apart from the birds. It's foundational to how we use our voice. We start toning, and it's rudimentary singing, and that can evolve. So it's one of the foundations that makes us human is music. So to be able to harness the elements of rhythm and match that, because we breathe in rhythm, our heart beats in rhythm, right? The universe is made of waves or particles, depending how you observe them. The body puts off waves, theta waves, delta waves, beta waves, alpha waves from the brain, electromagnetic waves from the heart. It's all waves, right? So music is a very powerful medium to meet people where they're at and touches on some of the earliest phases of our development. So music therapy as a profession seeks to use music to create wellness or some kind of clinical aim. So a lot of the goals that we would do is like anxiety reduction, increased socialization. If there were folks that had experienced stroke, often that part of the brain that controls speech was impaired, but music's processed in multiple areas in the brain, so many of them could still sing even if they couldn't speak. Which now it opens up all these possibilities for families who are wanting to connect. And now here's a language that everybody can connect over. If we're singing I've Been Blowing Bubbles or whatever their favorite song is. So yeah, increasing socialization, reducing anxiety. There's a lot of literature, research literature on music to relieve pain. And based on the gate control theory of pain, that you only have so many sensory receptors. And if you fill all of those with sensory stimulation, that there's no room for the pain sensations.
Interesting.
So it's interesting how that all works. And so I would go in, somebody would have a medical need. If it's somebody with like COPD, for example, having a tough time breathing with the lungs, we could do a lot. If they were willing to sing, that would like they'd have to expand their lungs to sing. And that was huge to keep their quality of life high. We had to be careful actually with music because hospice, you have to track somebody's decline so that the government reimburses the service. And sometimes we'd go in with music and they'd come alive. And we're seeing all this socialization and they're up moving their arms and all these things. And it's like, well, the nurse just said that, they lost the ability to raise their arms over their head, but they're getting real excited with music and start dancing around. And so it's like, in some ways we had to be careful with that. But it was powerful. The cognitive connections, the social connections, the emotional connections that come with music. And especially if we used it from their courting period.
Oh, yeah. What does that mean? Tell me more about
So you think about it, for me, when I hear certain songs, it takes me to a place. It takes me to a texture. It takes me to a smell. I see the colors. I see the people. Like, oh, there's a song. I'm right back at the eighth grade dance. And there are so many, as we go through kind of the 14 to 25 ish range, it's a very formative age for as our frontal cortex develops. And so to find music from that period to match wherever the person was, quite often there's there's a lot of sensory data that's encoded in the body and in the hippocampus that's like encoded with the music of that time that can take people back to locations, that can take people related. And it's powerful, right? We were working, there's a lady that was highly religious, so we made a playlist that had a lot of her favorite hymns from church to help her like be calm and relax. She
that.
was, listening to these hymns and just sobbing. And somebody came
Hmm.
in and said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "This song reminds me of my pastor who abused me all the time." And so it's like, you know, for intense or for light, for fulfilling or for frustrating, like so many of our deepest memories are encoded with music. And it's this beautiful experience as we come to end of life to be able to bring all of that up and just look at it, evaluate it, express what needs to be expressed so that there's no regrets left. And that's part of what creates a deep peace for people.
Wow. And so that's the context in which you were in this environment. I recall you sharing at times the experience that you had in witnessing aging and decline and death. Tell us more about that and how it's affected you.
So I watched 800 people die.
Hmm.
Some of those were quick, some of those were fast, some of those we developed a deep relationship over years, some of them I met once. Different levels of feeling connected or distant from these beautiful humans. For me, it was special every time
Hmm.
because each journey was so unique.
Hmm.
At the same time, I got to examine my own mortality. What does it mean to live and really live? What does it mean to live worry free? What does it mean? For me, it gave me incentive to tell people what I really think. Because I
Okay.
watched so many people who had swallowed what they really wanted to say for 20 years and they ate them alive. And then some of them didn't get a chance to speak it because their body changed and their speech went out or dementia took over before they could fully express themselves. And so they died with all these, you know, secrets inside. And I could see that in some of the physiology where, some folks were contracted, some folks were peaceful and open. And it helped me remove this judgment of, well, this is good and this is bad out of my life. And I got to turn to a lot of mindfulness because watching people die over and over and over and over again, watching somebody who used to drive and laugh and make food for themselves and become completely helpless and lose all their independence. That was intense for me to watch, right? Because I believe that relationships are a great mirror for us. And so it was interesting to consider as I'm watching this person, how does this apply to my own life? Are there ways that I'd like to adjust how I'm living if I can learn something from the life journey of this person? So that was deeply formative for me to watch so many people's unique experience. And it also helped me get comfortable with the sensation of sadness and what that feels like in my throat, what that feels like behind my eyes, what that feels like in my chest. It helped me get comfortable with the sensation of anger and be able to manage and navigate conflict, especially as families had intensity to share
Hmm.
and even intensity with God, at some level
Hmm.
of like, hey, there's some major suffering going on here. Like, what's all this about? To get comfortable with that experience of anger in my body has been huge so that it's not hijacking me. Same with fear and same with joy. Because there's a lot of, well, I feel happy, but I don't want anybody to know that I'm too happy, or I don't want to show off, or I don't want to make other people feel bad, or even you know, if this whole group of people is super bummed and I come in here like a ray of sunshine because I'm real excited, like how does that match,
Right.
clinically, and how does that fit professionally? Learning how to ride all of those emotions was a huge gift,
Mm.
in working in hospice over 7 years.
Is there a specific instance that you recall where, because of that experience, you chose to let something out rather than keep it in?
I would say that was with almost every patient.
Hmm.
It was this perpetual reminder to go home and tell my wife how I felt about her. It was this
Mm.
perpetual reminder to reach out to my siblings and say, hey, I'm sorry for when I teased you over this, and I'm sorry I was gone for that. And to hug people, because
Mm.
there's this like, well, I don't want to be too forward and whatever, but it's like humans run on hugs.
Hmm.
And especially in hospice, we run on hugs because it's so emotive, right? And it's like for as many people as I've watched die, I'm okay with it. I know what's happening. I know, and we get so many families who are like, well, you have to make them eat. And it's like, right, are you doing that for you? Or are we doing it because it's the best thing for your mom? Because your mom's body is wanting less and less food as she prepares for death. Do you need that to be different? Or can you be comfortable with the way nature runs its course? And so it's like, I knew that was coming, but it's new for every single family that goes through it. And so there's that constant education piece. And so touch is a huge part of what makes us human. There's all this research that shows, and especially with the elderly, um, compassionate touch, intentional compassionate touch has all these elevated wellness markers in like every study ever done. And that's what was so
Hmm.
damaging in the way COVID was handled, because you had all these people that supposedly can't touch anybody, and they, similar to the Romanian orphanage studies, they just shriveled and died like so quickly because humans are mammals, like we function on touch. And so being part of the hospice process and watching so many people's experience, like it really did help me offer hugs. It really did help me. And that's not for everybody, but it is for me,
Sure.
like I'm a that's my love language. So to offer that and find other people that connect with that has been important. And then yeah, to reach out to family and make sure that we're handling critical conversations now when we all have the mindset to deal with it, to tell my wife how I feel about her, and to try new things, right? Like I never once talked to somebody who said, man, I wish I would have worked more. Never once.
That is one of those things you hear in all of those videos of older people getting interviewed. They never regret not working enough.
Right.
They regret not taking that risk or not saying what needed to be said.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. In popular culture, stoicism is a big topic, especially among young men. And one of those popular phrases that came from these ancient Roman emperors that gave all this sage advice that's survived to till today. One of these key phrases is memento mori, which means essentially to meditate upon death, to achieve a lot of these realizations that I hear you talking about. Now, a difference I'm observing, however, is what I might see on Instagram of these guys touting all these stoic principles is they didn't see 800 people die. But there's a wisdom that comes from your experience. And I'm curious to know what has been your experience in bringing people along in their own journey of experiencing, well, either their own death or a loved one's death.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that sort of you you have the knowledge, you've been there many times before, but they haven't. So what was that like, shepherding them in that way?
It was easy to forget that this is somebody's first time. And so it was vital to have a team where we could each remind each other, like, hey, this is his family's first experience, right? Because at some level, in my knowledge slash arrogance, it's like I know what's going to create an awesome experience for everybody. So if you all will just do it the way that I think it should be done, it'll be great. And the family is thinking the same thing. And sometimes those are not the same. So we have, and I can go complain about it and I can be frustrated because, they're unsupportive to my plans or whatever. And so there's this huge element of letting go, this huge element of inviting, but being unattached. There's some natural, like a lot of Buddhism found its way into hospice, and
Mm.
especially where we were in New York, there was a lot of influence from Frank Ostaseski, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He was early on in the hospice movement and was working with hundreds and thousands of men who had AIDS at a time where everybody was afraid, like no one understood how the virus worked. And so they just thought if you were by somebody with AIDS, they could breathe on you and you'd get it. Frank was one of the first to go in there and just sit with every person and just sit and just be there. And there's something about presence that can completely change a room, especially if somebody's having an emotive experience. For me to be there, and stoic might be a good word for it, but engaged with no agenda except for witnessing. There's something so special to having our tears witnessed. And so for me to put on the hat of I'm here to witness, I'm here to support, I'm here to invite, I'm here to ask what would you love from me? I'm here to be of service. And not because I need to look like a hero or not because I need somebody to like me, but just simply we've got some clean agreements. We're all here to create an awesome experience for this family. How can I serve you today? Becomes this really powerful question. And as I've taken this into marriage and as I've brought this into my coaching practice currently, like most people don't need to be sped up. Most people need to slow down and experience what they're experiencing, right? Because it's easy to get busy when it's like, I have uncomfortable emotions. I don't want to deal with what I feel is sad. I don't want to deal with what I feel is angry. I don't want to deal with fears that I have. I don't want anybody to see my joy, so I won't stop and celebrate anything that's going well. I'll just keep myself busy so I don't have to deal with anything. And so to help people slow down, the joke is like, I don't know why I'm crying around you. And it's like, hey, that's probably 80% of the people I talk to. It's normal. Your tears are sacred. They're made to be witnessed. Thanks for sharing them with me. And I appreciate the opportunity to serve in that way. I know it's unique. And some people are like, are you alive in there? Like, what are you thinking? And it's like, it's just love.
Mm.
And in some ways, watching 800 people die, I get to look in myself at what's dying over and over and over again and bring love to that.
Mm.
The ugly, the beautiful, things I'm happy with, things I'm not happy with. But this constant reminder of, what really matters in life. And that even when it comes down to caring for somebody who's dying, right? Like, is it more important for me to be right here? Or is it more important for me to serve this family the best way we know how? Can I let go of what I think should happen and get curious? And that created some really powerful outcomes. And that's been across my life.
Mm. I appreciate that you sort of expanded this idea of death and saying what's dying inside me. What are the changes that are happening? Because I see this topic, though it is very physical and permanent, and we're talking about a very literal death here. So often in my practice as well, and I'm sure yours, I want to explore what it is you do more. It's all about navigating change. It's all about letting things go that are dying and inviting new things in that can grow. And so I see a lot of that, especially in people who are experiencing crisis. There are plenty of things in life aside from the final physical death that precede it and feel like just as big and worrisome as something like that. I know the experience of becoming a dad for the first time. That's a big change. The experience
Huge.
of your last kid leaving the house, going to college. That's a big thing. we can talk about all of these things every which way. I mean, we can talk about in career, big shifts, get laid off, or the business that you started is growing bigger than you, and you're not sure that you want it to grow bigger than you. You want to be needed. All sorts of
Yes.
scenarios where everything you're talking about being present, feeling where things are coming up within you, it's so important. I'm reminded I don't often read young adult fiction, but I did read The Fault in Their Stars, wherein the author John Green, one of his famous lines from that book, as the main character navigates cancer and death, he says that pain demands to be felt. And so, as you were recounting some of these experiences of people going through this stuff for the first time, and they're like, I don't know why I'm crying in front of you, it makes sense that it would be the things that they put off. Like you were saying, we try to outrun the things that worry us and pain us, but they have to be processed. And so, tell me more about how all of this adds up to what you're doing now.
I've always been passionate about families and families feeling connected. And I worked for 3 different hospice agencies, and they were all amazing. I also did a lot of work in assisted living facilities where we do socialization groups and get everybody interacting and singing. And if we're singing, how much is that doggy in the window? I got this stuffed dog that I'm passing around, and everybody's laughing and sending
Mm,
it on. And how can we work people's names into the songs to increase engagement
mm,
and all these things. And it was so much about family and connection and seeing people discover new things. And I get the same thing when I watch Michael Jordan's basketball career and Kobe Bryant's basketball career and Chris Paul and Vince Carter and even Stephen Curry at a certain level, where it's like, as their bodies change, their game has to change and they get to
mm,
reinvent themselves because it's different than when they were 23. And it's the same thing that I love unearthing, revealing
mm.
in these folks that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. Can I help them learn a new skill? Can I help them find why it's still worth being around? And that almost always comes as some kind of relationship.
Mm,
It is a reason for most people to stick around, and there's some kind of transmission that happens. And that I feel very passionate about that. COVID was a huge catalyst. I had 17 contracts in St. George, Utah, where I was serving, and all of them in March of 2020 said, "Hey, sorry, you're non essential.
wow,
You're done. Bye. Good luck. We don't know when this is going to change. So see ya."
wow,
And I had started my coaching practice in 2018. So it was like, well, I guess we're going to do all coaching all the time here and a lot of Zoom.
yeah,
And that really started to flourish. But it was a lot of the same skills, right? Like, served a lot of small business owners who were making more money than they ever had and fought more than they ever had and felt threatened. And people fought the most when they would get $20,000 bonuses and $60,000 bonuses and $120,000 bonuses. That was when the biggest fights happened. And that's not that fighting's bad. It's clearly asking for something, right? And I saw a natural fit for me to go in and provide emotional and relational solutions to help couples get really clear on what they're both valuing, or family members or business partners or whatever the relationship is. Get super clear on what you value. How do you communicate that in a way that is both authentic and respectful? And then help people emote and noticing what they're feeling. Because often, if I have uncomfortable feelings, I will try and make somebody else change. And that always creates debt at some level. That creates a debt of time, that creates a debt of energy, that creates financial debt. And it's, if we look at 80% of American businesses fail and close in 5 years, 4 out of 5, dude, like that's a lot of time and energy and money just like down the drain, go start another one. And it affects so many families. So I love helping small business owners stay profitable and notice what patterns they're running and let's get into profitable patterns. And so it's closely tied to what was happening in hospice. Very different audience, right? Because we're so focused on what we're growing and what we're building.
Go on. Yeah.
What else?
Tell me more about maybe a story of how these experiences connect. Tell me more about how these skills and experiences came to be of service to those couples, those business owners.
There's a real estate agent I was working with. Super loves people, deeply passionate about what she does, and had made more money than she ever had, and also spent a little bit more than she made. And she was like, how are we still in this process? She was coming up on being an empty nester and had this very intense realization. She had been the breadwinner and they were good with that, stay at home dad. And his whole life was built around their kids, right? And now their kids were done and moving on. And she had this very stark realization of like, I don't know my partner and I don't know if we're going to want to keep going here. And he's complaining that she's not home enough and she works too much. And she's like, well, I'm doing this all for everybody. Like, why am I so unappreciated? And so there's some big emotions on both sides. There's a whole bunch of fear and some unknown. I'll never forget the first day she told me, she's like, hey, just so you know, I don't do vulnerability. And I was like, that's fine if you want to stay exactly where you're at. But if you are blunting your sadness, you are also blunting your joy. If you're unwilling to experience your anger, you will not experience passion. All feelings are connected, right? And if I expand my capacity to experience fear, I'm also expanding my capacity to experience joy and vice versa. And so there's this fundamental teaching of like, feelings aren't good or bad, they're neutral. They're natural. They just happen. What can I do to ride them, to surf them, to experience them, right? And this real estate agent didn't necessarily want to go there, but she was willing to because she wanted to grow. And so as she got more vulnerable and honest about what she valued, as she was willing to experience her emotion and essentially tell the truth at a level she never had before, we started looking at her balance of emotional capital. Where is she putting her time and energy? And she was like doing all these appraisals in 3 different counties. And I said, tell me about this. And she's like, well, I hate them. They're really hard on my body and they waste all my time. And I was like, so are they like super lucrative? And she's like, no, they pay hardly anything. And I was like, well, why are you doing them? She's like, well, I'm in this business with my sister and she really needs me to. Oh, so this is a relational thing. And this is a not being fully authentic yes and no. This is a pleaser tendency. So we got to get clear on what she was willing to do and not willing to do. I was like, hey, do you think you could refer 2 of those counties to other people and maybe even set up a referral bonus? She's like, I would love that actually. And do you get to go have a conversation with your sister and tell her where your heart is? And she's like, and had some feelings, right? So we got to come back and experience the feelings of it that equipped her to go tell the truth and have this crucial conversation with her sister. And she did. And her sister was like, yeah, I'm kind of feeling this is done too. And they both freed themselves up to go do what really lights them up, right? Well, this is part of, for this real estate agent, what created some 6-figure months for her. Huge breakthroughs because she was able to focus on what she was really passionate about instead of trying to just make her sister happy and then resenting it and then having it take a huge toll on her body and like wasting all her time driving from county to county. And so here's an example of the power of being honest with myself,
Okay.
taking time and setting aside time to feel the emotion, right? And similarly, like she started looking at, what do I want out of my marriage? How do we get to be intentional about what the next 20 years is going to look like? Let's design that proactively. You're going to get to date him again. She's like, we have not been on a vacation together, just the 2 of us, for 30 years. Like it was kind of honeymoon, and then they had kids, and then it was like, yeah, all of our trips are with the kids. And I was like, right, you get to probably do one to get to know who y'all are now.
Yeah.
So that's where I see some of the overlap, from what I was learning in hospice about fulfillment, about saying what you really think, about being honest, about making sure that I'm putting my time and energy into what lights me up the most, and being really intentional about what I would love from each relationship that I'm choosing to put time and energy into.
Mm. I find that so interesting because there are so many different ways to talk about this, so many different conversations to be had. But in the story you just told, the reality was that when someone had the courage to face what was really going on, have a crucial conversation, like you said, it wasn't necessarily about how do I maximize my productivity. It was how do I get back to being more of who I am.
Totally.
Tell me more about that switch.
It's different for every person, which again, I appreciate. Hospice, it was like unique for every single family, and it was the first time for every single family. And I feel that same way when I work with small business owners who are passionate about their families and passionate about what they're doing in the marketplace, because it is so unique. Like the YouTubers I work with have a very different focus than the chiropractors that I serve, have a very different focus than the direct care doctor that I work with, have a very different focus than the real estate agent. It's all unique. A lot of the same principles come up, right? Tell the truth, feel your feelings. How do we get to communicate in a way that honors you and the person across from you? Seek to understand, bring curiosity, all these things. Can you ask the question again?
Tell me more about what you've seen with that switch between the common idea of I just need a coach to maximize my productivity for me.
Gotcha.
When in reality, it was something different.
With all those folks that I just named in the different markets that they're in, there's a huge focus on strategy and what's the best way to market my business. And I just need to get more clients, and I just need more viewings and more showings and more sales. And that's great. And there's a time and a place for that. I would say strategy is like 5% of the mix. And so much more of it is identity. And so to make that switch, to help folks understand, like, yes, strategy is important, but if you don't like what you see in the mirror, you can change strategies every 10 seconds and it doesn't matter. You can have the greatest strategy in the whole world, but if you don't believe it, doesn't matter. If you don't enjoy the work you're doing, doesn't matter. If you're not shining in your genius, you will burn out and you'll start taking time and energy from other people. You'll start spending money you don't have to try and make yourself feel good. You can have all the structure in the world and all the strategy in the world and all the productivity in the world, but if you don't handle what it means to be human, to be a mammal, to touch other human beings, to slow down and look somebody in the eye. I was just at a networking event this morning, and it was like a lot of very like, hey, can you introduce me to this person and this person and this person because they have X, Y, and Z thing that I want. And like at some level, it's a transaction, right? And many of the people I was talking to like either got uncomfortable with my eye contact or the fact that I was asking like questions about what they were interested in. Somebody was like, yeah, man, I was top 10 producer. So I went on this trip to Greece and such and such and such. And I got to meet all these businesses. I was like, cool, man, tell me about your trip to Greece. And he's like, and change the subject back into being productive. And it was like, no, like take a minute to celebrate what it was that you experienced in Greece. Like
Mm,
this is what adds zeros to small business revenue. This is what takes people from 5-figure months to 6-figure months, is coming inside to slow down and celebrate. Because if I'm unhappy with 10 grand, I'm going to be unhappy 10 times more with 100 grand. And that's part of the self-sabotage when we talk about surfing success. That's part of the self-sabotage is like, well, I'm already experiencing this wobble with my spouse at our current level. And if we 10x that, there's no way we're staying together. So of course you're not going to 10x it.
mm, right.
So it's vital to come inside and get to know who I am, whether the money's good or whether the money's tight, whether it's here or whether it's gone, whether the sex is good or whether it's absent. whether my kids will talk to me or whether they're in prison and they won't. Like, I have to love who I am and what I see in the mirror. That's the foundation to build on. It's the only foundation to build on that's going to be lasting.
Hmm. I had some years working in the social work field, working with juvenile sex offenders. And that very much informed my outlook on life, that allowed me to appreciate much more deeply that things can be upside down in your life. Things can be really backwards. And it comes down to support and structure and ultimately your continual choice towards something better that gets you into a better standing in life. And that experience, along with many others, led me and my wife Miranda to this mantra that I've often repeated on the show. And I believe there's nothing too big to forgive, and there's nothing too small to celebrate. And so, just like you said, I there there's a popular voice out there, Alex Ramosi, and he's popularized a lot of very pragmatic, productivity themed ideas, and that's great. He's very successful financially and in his businesses. But one thing I recall him being very frank about is that when he hit these benchmarks, when he hit these milestones, he wouldn't feel anything. And so, in contrast to what you're saying, now we don't know everything about him or where the final tally will be, but it seems so often in the experience of your clients that being able to really feel and appreciate the good that's happened opens up opportunities.
Huge opportunities. And it's also what makes us safe and approachable as human beings. Like, if I can come from a place where I have nothing to hide and nothing to defend and nothing to prove, like, what you see is what you get. Here's me. There's no facade. There's no, like, I need to hide this thing that you can't know about. Like, people, we don't like sneaky. It's uncomfortable to be with people who are sneaky. We love being with open, honest, vulnerable folks. That's why is there a $14 billion porn industry? Because we're all craving connection. We're all craving intimacy and vulnerability. And here are a whole bunch of people arranged in dots on a screen that are like super open and super intimate and inviting everybody to come watch, and there's nothing to hide. And that, at some level, is incredibly attractive. Of course, it's a $14 billion industry. Lots of research about how healthy that is, or not healthy, as the case may be. But like, every human wants to feel connected. And it's so powerful to live a life where I can be honest and authentic all the time and I don't have to hide anything. And so to build on that foundation, because business only magnifies that, relationships only magnify that. If I feel like I have to hide my kids, or, sometimes I'm like, I don't like to mention that I went to BYU because that's polarizing and I don't want to alienate relationships with, whatever you may or may not feel about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Because I've had neighbors that like stop talking to me after that comes up. And it's like, hey, like we continue to be neighbors. Like, it's like, let's keep relating, but I'm not for everybody, and that's okay. So it's like, just to be honest about our experience and is huge. And maybe I don't have to go broadcast everything everywhere to everybody, but to be fully expressed is, I believe, the next evolution, right? That's why Brene Brown's work is blowing up in the way that it has, right? Because it's all about like, hey, shame drives so much of who we be. So do the opposite of that. Create vulnerability with yourself first and with the people you care about, and then wherever else it pertains and what we're trying to do, right? And that is what builds trust, and that's where we can have great business partnerships, and that's where we can have fulfilling family relationships. And I don't need anything from anybody else. It's a very powerful way to live.
When we do that, when we invite vulnerability, when we are open, there can be that gap between being comfortable, or at least being willing to be open with who we are, and finding the people who are okay with that. Because there is I am not for everyone. And that's that's true of every single person. You're not for everyone. What's been your experience in writing that or bridging that gap when the the people haven't shown up yet to be there for you?
As far as like if I'm sharing openly and people aren't meeting me there,
Yeah.
there's sadness naturally, and there's a deep sense of aloneness. I was just talking with somebody who owns a media company. Huge goals, huge success, 200% of his income last year to this year, like crushing it. He's got some huge goals and has been sharing with his family about them, and they're like, why? Like, don't you have enough? Like, why are you still like, I don't understand it. Like, you're just into money now, I guess. It's like, and there's this crippling sadness of like, no, like you're missing the point. Like, come celebrate with me. Like, come expand with me. Like, I want to create this for me, and I want everybody to create at this level also if you want to. And no judgment either way. Just like, I love to expand, right? And that at some level is dangerous. It's wild, you know, look at the way we vilify billionaires as a culture on comment boards, on Twitter feeds, in news headlines. You know, Zuckerberg this, Musk that, like Richard Branson this, blah, 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 blah. We have all these opinions on how folks ought to be using their influence and their resources. And there's a deep resentment there. Why is that? Right? I love Robert Kiyosaki. He's like, instead of criticizing strategy, teach me how. Like, okay, cool. Donald Trump didn't pay taxes in whatever year. Cool. Teach me how. Jeff Bezos didn't pay $110 million in taxes in 2021. Cool. Teach me how. It's a very different mindset. I'm wondering. There's a sadness that comes when I elevate, when I make changes, when I come to a new level of vulnerability and the people I love don't meet me there. And in some ways, it's like I'm going to the mechanic asking for groceries. I have all these random friends on the internet that celebrate me in a huge way, in ways that sometimes my siblings don't understand, because like I'm the weird one that had long hair and made his own business, and why don't you just get a real job? And there's some natural sadness there, and that's something that I get to sit with, right? Because at the end of the day, am I creating life for them, or am I moving on what I feel inspired to create in the world?
I really appreciate the way you answered this, because to simply say there is sadness, to acknowledge it, to put a name to it, but not necessarily a judgment. Because when we do that, we avoid the naming. We let it be amorphous. We let it
Right.
be in the background, and it just continues to bother us and eat at us. But to be able to do what you just did shows how natural it is, and in some ways how human, and in that way how bonding it can be. That this is a common experience, not that it's strange to say that a feeling of isolation can be a common experience, but it's true. And there can be some sort of comfort in really recognizing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's easy to gloss over, and it's easy to just get angry or, screw you anyway, or however it is that I bristle and, push people away before they can hurt me. When I have the ability to surf my emotions, there is nothing that can hurt me. I can feel pain, but there's nothing that can hurt me.
Mm,
That is a very, very, very powerful place to live from.
absolutely.
And for anybody innovating in the marketplace, that's where we have to live from. I watched Deion Sanders' press conference the other day, and somebody, I don't even remember how they framed the question, but I just remember him saying, like, look at me. Do you get the sense that I care anything about what you think? And he just like ripped this reporter. And he's just like, I'm not here for you. I know who I am. I don't need you to think anything about me. I'm here. I feel called doing what I'm doing in the way that I'm doing it. I know who I am. I know what I'm creating. If you want to be part of it, great. If you don't, get out.
Mm.
And, you know, you could look at that and say, like, well, what a prick, and he's real haughty and whatever. And at the same time, like, here's supreme confidence. And he may go home and cry about that later, and he may not, but he's so focused on what he's innovating in the marketplace, he doesn't have time for what people think about that.
Mm.
Maybe he'll apply some feedback if it's relevant, but if I'm living my life for somebody else based on what they think, I'm, you know, this is what a lifetime of regret looks like. And that was part
Mm.
of watching so many people pass, was
Mm.
talking about these different regrets. That's like, it's exactly what you spoke to. I wish I would have forgiven sooner. I wish I would have forgiven me sooner. Wish I would have forgiven my daughter sooner. I wish I would have reached out to my ex and at least created a friendship. I wish, I wish. I was like, man, time to learn.
Wow. And I think the example you gave with Deion Sanders is so interesting because our expression and experience of confidence can be very contextual. And I think a lot of people have a tough time feeling that in themselves because they're worried that it's just going to come off as arrogant. And that can be quite a thing to try to navigate within yourself
Absolutely.
and discover what does that look like for me, because there is a place, there is a time for that very matter of fact attitude that you relayed, that if you're on your mission, then no one's getting in your way. And it's okay to have that kind of confidence and that kind of strong will. But there's a huge nuance between what that feels like and what perhaps we more often see an immature version of that. And
I
so
love that you said
navigating,
immature. Yeah, that's such a great way to describe it.
mm,
Because it can be weaponized quickly too.
mm, expand a bit more on what you mean.
It's like you said, like the false humility helps no one. And in some ways is one more layer of a giant lie in how I want everybody to think of me a certain way. There's a level of, if I'm on a mission and I make myself right and make everyone else wrong, that's going to create debt of
Mm,
time and of energy and of money. I'm going to create sides and I'm going to recruit people to my side and ostracize people. And we're seeing that at national levels, global levels. We're seeing that in 50% of homes that are dividing up custody of children.
mm,
And not good, not bad. It's just like, hey, let's look at division here. And what is it that I'm trying to divide? Right? If I make if I need to be so right that someone else has to be wrong, that's the core of the issue. So there's, like you said, there's this nuanced version of like, if I'm clear on what I value and I'm committed to go create it, great. And people will want to join, and some people don't resonate with that. Awesome. Best wishes, good vibes. Go find the thing that lights you and go do that. I'm not for everyone, right? And very different than this weaponized version of like, now you're an obstacle. I'm
mm,
going to destroy you. I'm going to put time and energy into making sure that you're wrong and I'm right. And there's a lot of proving and defending behind that. Often I can tell the difference by how my body reacts. Like, my body gets really tight and starts to shrink. My abs are clenched. If my pelvic
mm,
floor is seizing, there's usually something to look at there where I'm not in forgiveness.
mm.
I'm not wholly committed to what I'm creating. I'm more worried about what somebody else thinks. And this again is what creates patterns of debt. Not good, not bad. It's just like, do we want to keep doing that?
Right.
Is this serving? Watching so many people have a death experience,
Mm.
the theme I was noticing was I enjoyed life more when I was in a forgiving place than when I was in a judgmental place.
I really appreciate that because it rhymes with me in the saying that I try to carry with me, that you can't be curious and judgmental at the same time.
Well said.
Yeah. And I think there's a Walt Whitman quote that riffs off of, but it's not a new idea, but it is very personal to me. And I think that's, part of the fun of living is that we get to find these little things that mean a lot to us.
Love that.
Daniel, where can people connect with you?
The best place would be at www.createprofitableliving.com. Lots of resources there to build emotionally profitable skills, relationally profitable skills, financially profitable skills, so that we can play in the question, how good can you stand it? I love that from Gay
Mm.
Hendricks, The Big Leap.
Mm.
It's been a powerful mantra, been deeply inspiring to myself and many others I serve. So that's what we play with at createprofitableliving.com is how good can you stand it?
I love it. Very good. Well, one question I love to end every interview on is to ask you, what does courage mean to you?
Courage to me means willingness to become aware, aware of how I show up, aware of my light, aware of my dark, aware of what I'm proud of, aware of what I'm ashamed of, aware of what is ugly about me, what is beautiful about me, and all of these patterns that I run in my thoughts and my feelings and my neurology. The willingness to be aware of all that will pretty quickly expand into an awareness of what others' patterns are. And that to me requires courage to look and to be willing to be aware and then to notice feedback and apply it to come back into alignment, right? If I'm clear on where I'm going and I'm willing to be honest about where I'm at, is there a gap there? It requires courage to look.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very, very, very powerful process, especially for aspirational, ambitious high achievers to keep coming back to where am I at? Where am I going? Is there a gap? Do I get to close it? That could be emotionally, relationally, spiritually, financially. It requires courage to look. And we celebrate every time somebody looks, whether they like what they see or no.
True. True. Well, Daniel Adams, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for the conversation, Sam.
Yeah. Well, I'm Sam, the Courage Coach for Executives, and remember, it starts with you.